Alright, this video is just going to be kind of a update to my build. It's not so different from the last one, but there was a few flaws with the last one that I had trouble living with, so I just thought I'd go ahead and share those with you. Basically, one of my problems with the last build is I just didn't have enough stamina or stamina regeneration in spite of glyphing for stamina and all that. I could get CC'd after a little while and not be able to break free, so that was one problem with it. The other problem was I really missed the ultimate regeneration of the Bloodspawn set, and you get a lot of regeneration of ultimate with the Bloodspawn set, so I just decided, well, how can I basically incorporate that back into my build? And one of the other things is I liked being somewhat tanky and somewhat unkillable. So I'll just go ahead and share a few of the changes I've made. Starting out, I went back to the Bloodspawn set. This thing gives you so much ultimate. Your ultimate generation feels like it just feels like it's just always there for you, and it feels like your ultimates cost half what they do as a result of this. Of course, I kept the Giuliano set. Now this is a heavy piece, this is a medium piece, everything else is light, so as to take advantage of the light armor abilities. Giuliano's is actually a slight second place to Spinners. Spinners actually does a little bit more damage and that sort of thing, but it doesn't have as much crit. And for this build, or any sorcerer build, you have Power Surge, and this heals you for every critical strike. Not only does it heal you for a critical strike, your critical strike heals will be a crit, and that'll come in line as you have just a tad over 50% of critical when you're fully buffed up and everything. And I'll explain some of that in a minute. But the Giulianos has been a really good set, and I've used that. Sash of the Lich, this is really good as well. It will give you a lot of magic recovery. Once you get down below 33% and you cast a magic ability, your magical recovery with a potion is going to go up to about 3,500, and that lasts for 20 seconds. So this has been really good as far as the recovery phase, and it's just about a must-have. I've really enjoyed it myself. Now, getting into the jewelry and the jewelry traits, basically I have 2 arcane, both glyph with spell damage, and 1 protective, and this is glyphed with stamina recovery. Now I did that in order to keep this up. You want about this much or higher of stamina recovery. Typically when you're out in the battlefield you can dark deal and get your magic back and that sort of thing, but you're really going to need this and this. These kind of complement each other. It's pretty important out there. Now, my weapons are a flame staff and a restoration staff. This glyph is important as well as this glyph, and I'll tell you why here in a minute. going to the Destruction Staff passives. Equipped with a Flame Staff will increase your damage done with single target abilities by 8%. Now that is going to affect all these abilities, Hunting Curse, as well as everything else you see here. These are all going to be jumped up to 8%, so this is really something that you want. Now you'll notice I'm glyphed with a disease enchantment, and you're probably asking me, well, why'd you do that? If you haven't seen my previous video, this will give Minor Befoul, which is a 22% healing reduction. If I go into my champion points, I've got points into Befoul, which give me another 50%. So in effect, I've got about 72% of healing reduction. This is really important when you're fighting Templars and that sort of thing. Now the glyph only lasts 5 seconds. Keep that in mind, so you got to be doing all your light attacks and all your other attacks, you know, in between that. But ideally you want to keep this glyph procced, because as long as it is, it's going to really affect their ability to heal. Now I kind of came up with this as a result of it was somewhat frustrating to fight Templars and everything, to get them down to almost 0. And they would do a Breath of Life or something and be almost backed up to full health. So this has really helped in order to stop that. This glyph, on my particular build, it will raise my spell damage all the way up to 3100. I think it's like 3110 or something like that, but this will increase my my damage done. It only goes for 5 seconds, but going into a fight, sometimes that's all you need. For example, my crystal fragments are sitting at 12,441. Now buffed up with Power Surge, it's all the way up to 13,370. Now if I was to hit someone with a light attack on the Restoration Staff, now keep in mind, this is the infused set, so it's going to increase your weapon and spell damage. If I did that, I would be all the way up to just about 14,700 and something. So that's a pretty significant bump. If you can remember to do that, you're going to do a lot of damage there. So anyway, that's the I guess that's it as far as the hardware. Getting into the champion points, of course, Warlord, you're going to want to be able to break free. That's important. You're going to want stamina recovery. You're going to want magic of recovery. And I've got a few points here, as I didn't really have a good place to put them. Health recovery is good, but this is really going to be kind of it's kind of one of those things. It's not going to make much difference at all for what I got in there. And I have 71 points into Befoul, raising my healing reduction abilities by 50%. Now that's going to work really, really well in conjunction with this glyph on this staff. On this particular build, that's what you want. And I can't tell you how many times this has really benefited me. Going here into the blue tree, this is your damage tree. I've got 75 in Elemental Expert, what complements that is this Master in Arms. I've got 23% here. So these two add up. Then I've got Spell Erosion, which is my spell penetration. I've got 72% points here. And I've got 19 into Elfborn. Now, if you're looking at this, you're probably thinking, okay, well, why don't you have more into Elfborn? You know, you have nearly 53% of critical. Well, all of these will feed this. So basically, they'll make your critical hits stronger. Don't have anything into there. Now I've got points into Ironclad, which is your total damage taken. These two complement that. This includes physical damage, magic damage. Now this is my spell resistance. I've got 13 points into that. I've got 37 here into physical resistance. The reason I did that was to keep these two relatively close. Now I have 21k spell resistance. I think I have something left over from my I did a magic attunement in Craglorn, and it's carried over here into Cyrodiil. But anyway, there you have it. As you can see, my physical and spell resistance are not to a point where I'm a tank or anything like that, but they're respectable. And when the blood spawn procs, it'll give me about 26k on each of these. So I've got points here into critical resistance, which goes along with my impenetrable armor. And I've got some points into Bastion because my build isn't really high magicka, so this actually does benefit some. Give me a little bit of additional shields. This is kind of a flex spot. I don't know if this is really ideal, but it's pretty close. I've got a pretty good shield from this still. I think it's somewhere around 9,500. And I guess that's about it. So there you have it. Now, as far as abilities that I use, when I go into a fight, you always want to hit them with Haunting Curse first. Now, this does a lot of damage, and it's kind of a fire and forget skill. I've had this hit enemies really hard. This is something you also use as Power Surge at the beginning of a fight. It lasts for 33 seconds, and then your Boundless Storm. Now, if you have time, run a Dark Conversion, and you're probably thinking, well, why do that? Right now, my critical is sitting at 36.5. If I run a Dark Conversion, now it's at 42.5. If I hit a Spell Power Pot, now I'm all the way up to 52%, which is a real respectable rate of crit. The crit is going to heal you for quite a bit, so this is just something to keep in mind. And not only that, your critical hits do count in this game. There was a streamer and I saw his kill count where I had killed him. I went to the recap and my Haunting Curse had critted on him twice for about 7,500. So it was a pretty respectable number, and it hits pretty hard. This is one of the reasons I like having this set. So just getting back into it, I make sure this is up. I make sure Boundless Storm is up. I hit him with Haunting Curse. And if I want to do one dark deal, I can. And what does that give me? If you go into your dark magic passives under exploitation, that'll give you about 6% added critical over a period of about 20 seconds. And it'll do it for your group as well, so that's just something to keep in mind. Of course, Boundless Storm gives me a little bit of mobility for 4 seconds. It's actually kind of a good thing that, you know, they nerfed the major expedition, you know, down from 7.5 seconds to 4 seconds. But it'll still get you out of the way. And this is one of the best ultimates in the game. It's called Light's Champion. It doesn't cost a lot. And basically it's kind of a get out of jail free card or something like that. It's just if you're in a heavy fight and you pop this, chances are, you know, you're going to get a second lease on the fight. And if you're wearing this set, this will really help to feed that. So basically your Light's Champion is going to be pretty consistently there for you. So when you're attacking an enemy, you want to have Haunting Curse on them at all times. And if you're dealing with a Nightblade, make sure it's on them more often than not, because this will bring them out of stealth. This is your spam Force Pulse. This is your CC, Rune Cage. This thing really works well. Now whenever you're getting ready to hit somebody with an Ice Comet, you get your Ice Comet started, and just before it's getting ready to hit them with a Rune Cage, because they can't block this, and they'll have to take the full force of the Ice Comet. This is Crystal Fragments. This is the morph to have, not the other one. And I'll tell you why. It gives you 20% more damage, and when it does proc, it costs half of the magicka. So you're looking at about a 1,700 cost as far as magicka, and it just hits like a truck. Normally buffed up. This hits for 13 to reach 70. I can just tell you, not on this particular build, but in other builds I've hit. It seems like this thing has just hit pretty consistently non-crit for about 17,000 on mobs. It's gone higher. But anyway, there you have it. If I was to hit with a light attack first, with my rest of staff giving me that 5 seconds, I would have 14,700 and something. I think it was 14,730. But anyway, that's important. Mage's Wrath does a ton of damage. It's your execute. It'll hit them with a certain amount of shock damage first, and then it'll go the rest of the way if they're under 20%. This is really the thing to have. Of course, I've got Hardened Ward. This is invaluable. Not only that, but the fact that it's on this bar, and it is a Daedric summoning skill. this increases my health and stamina recovery by 20%. So it's really important just to have one of these skills on your bar. So now this is Ice Comet, and this comes from the Mage's Guild, and this will give you an additional max magic and magic recovery by 2%. So this is something you consider. Now another ability, and I've used this quite often, is Dawnbreaker Smiting. It's a low cost ultimate, and it goes well on short range targets and quick fights and that sort of thing. So, but this is up to you. You know, you can go either way. It just depends on the fight that you're in. Now, as far as getting into combat, sometimes what I'm going to tell you is that you're just going to have to practice. But fortunately, in this game, mobs are pretty plentiful, and you're able to practice on them. The ideal thing, I think, you know, for anybody wanting to learn, is go down to the sewers in Imperial City and find one of the mana bosses and fight against them for a while. Now, if you're able to survive and kill that mana boss, you know you're starting to get to a point where you're fairly good, and you can advance onto other players. You know, practice streaking through them, going to the other side of them, breaking from CCs, that sort of thing. It's actually not really hard once you start to learn it. At first it seemed kind of impossible. I used to hide from those things, but now it's just not a problem. So any fight you get, if you can keep this on them, and you keep a Resto Staff light attack on them, which raises your damage, that's going to go a long way. Also, using streaking through enemies and that sort of thing will disorient them and give you a few seconds to get on the other side of them. Players tend to not react that fast to that. You know, they're not. You know, they're not as good as locating you and doing something. So generally, you'll have a few seconds after you streak through them to do whatever else it is that you want to do on a particular player. That's one thing. The other thing is getting line of sight if you're on a group of players and they're coming after you. Get some line of sight and destroy them one at a time. The other thing is distance. You know, if you're fighting a Zerg, you don't want that whole Zerg to reach you at a time. So you want to kind of pick them off at the outskirts one by one, using your distance. And with this build, it's a fairly easy thing to do. Now all these hits, something to consider, this does a pretty good bit of damage, but it also hits at a 50% crit rate. This really counts in Cyrodiil or wherever you're at. This is what you're going to want to have. Your spell and physical resistance are respectable. especially when Bloodspawn procs, and it just about always seems to proc. And that is a result of the trait I put on this ring. You have increased spell resistance, increased physical resistance, which works really, really well with this build. So it'll give you, it gives you quite a bit, you know, in comparison to everybody else out there running in light armor. You're not going to die. You do sacrifice a little bit of max magicka, as arcane will give you 840 magicka. This doesn't, but it does give you that added spell and physical resist, and that's come in really, really handy. So I guess that's about it for the friends of mine that want to get better at PvP. What I would do is I would suggest going into the dungeons of, say, Imperial City and fighting those banner bosses, or if the upstairs is clear enough for you, start fighting those world bosses walking around. Once you are able to beat those guys, it'll take practice, but you know you can get there, and you can get to a point where you're beating those guys. You'll be able to react quickly enough and everything to other players, and that's a pretty good gauge of just about how you will do. So you can always use that. It's kind of like sparring in boxing or whatever. You're gonna have to tackle the hard stuff in order to get good, in order to run other players, because there's a lot of really good players out there. I'd say I probably win like 90% of my fights or whatever. That's not a hard number. It depends on who's playing. But with that said, there are a few players that are really, really good, and you're gonna have a tough time with. But once you're up to the level where you're soloing dungeon bosses and that sort of thing, and your reactions are good enough, and you're light attacking in between your heavy, in between your skills and that sort of thing. See, for instance, I'll go into this. Okay, notice this light attack. And that's how that operates. Now another thing, notice around my hand the little crystals, and you'll get a sound in between that. Did you hear that sound and you see those little crystals around my hand? That's when that procs. Now I can use Dark Deal for a heal if I want to. Now my light attack with my Resto Staff has raised my weapon and spell damage to 3100. And there you have it. I think that describes this adequately as to how this crystal frag works. You want to wait till it makes that little noise and until it procs around your hands. and you can see that. And once you shoot this, it's going to give you 20% more damage, and it's kind of bread and butter to a sorcerer. Another thing you're going to want to do is, if you anticipate someone dying fairly quickly or something along those lines, you're gonna want to hit them with the Mage's Wrath skill. This does a ton of damage, and it's a really good execute, and it's one of my top choices. So yeah. Anyway, this is kind of a non-professional build. This is just something that I do for friends and that sort of thing. It's what I've been using, and I've had pretty good luck with it. Now notice, there's one other thing. Your magic recovery isn't really high with this, as is, because I've got these glyphs with spell damage. My stamina recovery is fairly high. So what you're going to want to do is, in between fights or whenever you can, run a dark deal, and that'll increase your magicka. Let me show, now that I've got my enemies gone. Okay, my Lich is procced. My magic recovery is sitting at 3474, which is pretty respectable, and that's going to give me 20 seconds of magic recovery. So that actually procs a lot more than what it says on the Lich set itself. Just something to keep in mind, that's why I use this. So anyway, I guess that's about it. I hope this helps some of you guys out there. I would just say to get out there. If you're looking to be a better PvP player, you're probably going to have to start training along those lines, getting into the dungeons with the bosses and being able to solo those guys. Once you've done that, I would say you're in a pretty good place for entering the PvP world. And some of this stuff just takes practice, but it can be done. So anyway, I guess that's about it. I hope this has helped you guys, and I'll see you out there. Take care.